Continuing a conversation about the stand-down order that Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin has issued. Concerns, we've talked about the lack of clarity in the definition of extremism, because we know from going back to the Obama administration that, as we previously discussed, that is an elastic term, oftentimes defining anything the left is against. Now, we also know, now we've talked about this in the context of what the left has done since January the 6th and how they've used that as leverage to try to silence conservatives. But we also know from a historical perspective how the left has used the military to push through an agenda, and aggressively so. We saw that under the Obama administration with the pushing of their radical sexual policy and how members of the military were penalized if they didn't go along, how there was a purge of military leadership to make way for a more politically correct leadership. What impact will this have on, number one, the men and women who serve in uniform, who disproportionately are actually conservative because it's a part of the, I don't know, I guess it's part of being conservative and especially being Christian that you serve others. And I'm so grateful we still produce men and women who are willing to serve others. How will they be impacted, and might they be driven away from the military? And then what do we have? What will this do to unit cohesion? And what will it do to military readiness? Well, joining me now to talk about this and more, a retired Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin, the Executive Vice President here at the Family Research Council. He served for 36 and a half years in the United States Army. He was a founding member of the Delta Force, and one of his last assignments was over at the Pentagon in military intelligence. General, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Tony. I'm glad to be with you.
Let me just ask you straight out of the gate here. Are you concerned about this stand-down order?
I'm very concerned about it, Tony. We need to go back to the mission of the military, and it is to win the nation's wars. This is a military that has stood the test of time. We've had ups and downs, but we have also been there when this country needed our military. You have been part of that military. And when you are not focused on what our primary mission is, which is to win the nation's wars, and you're getting into all this social engineering, and you're wasting precious training time for things like what has been directed by Lloyd Austin, the new Secretary of Defense, you are going to wind up putting those troops into a combat situation, and they're not going to be prepared because we've wasted a lot of their time with things that are leadership issues at the unit levels. Those company commanders and battalion commanders and brigade commanders, they ought to be dealing with these things when they know that someone has crossed the line in some way. There's never been a tolerance for people being associated with extremist groups. And that doesn't mean it hasn't happened, but I'm very concerned about us using time that should be used for preparing for battle.
Well, I rarely do I take issue with you, General, but there has been a record under the Obama administration where political correctness got in the way of actually dealing with extremists who were in the military, but they happened to be on the left scale, the politically protected side of extremism. And you had an Army major at Fort Hood, Texas, Abdul Hassan, who killed 13 people there. And there were warning signs, but no one touched it. In fact, according to the National Public Radio, Walter Reed officials expressed concerns that they would be accused of, quote unquote, discriminating against Hassan because of his extremist Islamic beliefs.
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. So I stand corrected if that was the way you interpreted what I was saying. I was saying that in terms of
I was picking
a systemic. I know you were, and that's not an unusual thing. But in terms of there being a systemic group or propensity for young soldiers to come in the military and be able to continue, even if they were involved in something outside of the military, to continue to be involved with an extremist group. But look,
right.
Here's where we're going. I'm afraid, Tony, and you remember this well. In the Obama administration, we had photographs of a training session where they put not the Family Research Council, but the American Family Association. They put them up on a slide and said, if you have any contact with this organization, then you are risking being court-martialed. And they lifted up this pro-family, pro-life, pro-religious values. They lifted them up as being one of those extremist groups. So where is this going? That came out under the Obama administration, and I know you remember that. We reacted to it very quickly.
Well, and a source of information that they were drawing from to come to these conclusions was the Southern Poverty Law Center, which once again has found favor in the Biden administration and no doubt will be a part of helping the Department of Defense come to these conclusions as to what is extremism.
Well, that's exactly right. And it's also, and just go back and read some of the documents now that are coming out as a result of this directive by Lloyd Austin. Read some of these documents here, and there's a big emphasis on white supremacy. They're looking for white supremacists. Well, this is going too far. I mean, our military has been integrated since 1947, when Harry Truman integrated the military, and there was a period right after Vietnam where there were some racial issues, and the leadership in the military took care of that. The leadership brought that to an end, and that's what we need to be doing now. And what we don't need is we don't need a directive from the White House, which Lloyd Austin is issuing an order that obviously he was told to do. We don't need anything from the White House that is so ambiguous that you could almost pin anybody you wanted to with being an extremist for one reason or another, or a white supremacist, largely just because they're white. And I see this causing morale problems in the military, and I see it causing a tremendous rift within small units.
Right.
Where you've actually got a protected class in those units now, whether they are people that express open support for the President of the United States, or whether they have views about racism that don't comport with that of the commander of the units or whatever. This is going to be a morale problem, but I go back to what I said initially. It is also going to take up time that we should be giving them training to be able to defeat the enemy on the battlefield, and that really scares me, because we saw what happened when those patrol boats were taken off the coast of Iran
right.
in 2015, and those people didn't have a clue what they were supposed to do, and everything that they should have done is something they should have been taught in a classroom setting and then in a practical application, but they were too busy doing things that were part of the social experiments that the Barack Obama administration forced on our military, and it's going to happen again, and it bothers me a great deal.
You're listening to Washington Watch. I'm Tony Perkins, your host. My guest, Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin, Executive Vice President here at the Family Research Council, retired 36 years serving in our nation's military. General, I want to go back to what you said about how this might be used within the ranks of the military. Congressman Steve Cohen of Tennessee I'm going to paraphrase what he said, but he insinuated that This was back when, in January, when 25,000 National Guard soldiers were placed at the Capitol. And he was insinuating that most of them were white males and probably Trump voters and inclined to cause trouble. And so this type of thinking that is clearly being driven by the left, if you have someone in the military and all you have to do is say, well, this person's an extremist, he has extremist views, this is going to cause, you talked about the morale issue, this is going to cause division and potentially ruin people's careers.
There's no question about that. And what this is an attempt to browbeat people into submission. And that is not what we need in our military. We need people that understand how to execute their skills. And they're not all infantrymen, but how they execute their skills. But we also need people that can think, and people that feel free to express their ideas, people that can, in a respectful way, disagree with their chain of command. That's acceptable, and it's always been acceptable in the military. And now what we're going to do is we're trying to create a military of nothing but little lemmings that will just follow along and nod their head for whatever the Secretary of Defense and the Commander-in-Chief say. And we've been through this with Obama, and it devastated our military. And again, I go back to the situation in Iran when those patrol boats were taken, and those guys were, within 5 minutes, were looking into the cameras to the international audience and saying, this is all our fault, and we want to apologize to the Iranians and thank them for their hospitality. You have never seen it. Go back to Vietnam. Go back to the period where this was taken seriously. As to how you act if you've been taken in captivity and what the Geneva Convention says. And now, instead of knowing what the Geneva Convention says, we're going to find out what some egghead that has written something about critical race theory or about white supremacy. That's what we're going to stuff down their throats. And again, it is not helping our military to do its primary job.
I want to go back to something I touched on earlier in the program with Roger Maxwell, who is a military attorney and has written about this and expressed concerns. And he said, based upon the lack of definition of extremism, essentially using the term that, or using the definition that it would deprive one of their civil rights, that any Christian military member who espouses a traditional view of marriage would, after the Supreme Court decision in Obergefell, put him at risk of running afoul of Alston's instruction. What will this do to religious liberty in the military?
Well, they're exactly the same thing that we've already seen. We've already seen a good example of this. And look, again, if you are a Christian and you say anything that offends anybody in the LGBT community in the military now, and I thought we were beyond it, but now your career is in jeopardy. And in fact, the way this is going, as Mr. Maxwell said, the way this is going, you can be held liable. You can be actually probably court-martialed or given non-judicial punishment of some time, but you can certainly be put out of the Army.
So how is this going to impact the recruiting? Since, historically we know that those in the military tend to skew more conservative and those that have more of an exposure to biblical faith.
Well, go back and look at what happened in the Obama administration. The services started having trouble recruiting. And that was because it wasn't just because these young patriotic Americans that really did want to serve their country. It was about moms and dads all across the country that saw what was going on, right. And especially those that were people of faith. And they said, look, my son, my daughter, I don't want them to go in the military because they have to check their faith at the door. And we raised them up in the church, and we don't want them to have to make that decision. And that is, again, it's another morale factor. And look, it's morale is a very important equalizer on the battlefield. When you've got a unit that sticks together, and I've seen this, you've got a unit that sticks together, they believe in each other, and they'll fight to defend their buddy. They'll never leave a fallen comrade to fall into the hands of the enemy. That's what you want, but you don't get that when you create this kind of environment where you're pitting them against each other because of their race or because of who they voted for. That's one of the freedoms that we defend. Probably the most fundamental freedom that we defend is what our founding fathers gave us, which was consent of the governed and the opportunity to choose our own leaders at the polls.
And that is a good point to leave it on. General, we're out of time. Thanks so much for joining us.